for them in the past, and yet how quickly they had forgotten or forsaken everything that God had done for them. Before this time in Judges, the people had been delivered by the judge Deborah and had rested for 40 years. However, as Judge 6, verse 6 states, they had done evil in the sight of God. And as a result, they were in this current repression. In the book of Judges, you know, it's the cycle of sin. They would sin, they would cry out to then God would have pressure someone to oppress them. They would cry out to God. Then God would send a judge. The judge would come through, and then they would repent of their sins, and then they would live right for a minute, and before you know it, they were back in sin. The oppression of Israel at this time was so great that the people were hiding and living in dens and caves and strongholds in the mountains. When Israel would try to sow food, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them, and they would encamp against them and destroy their produce and kill their livestock. And that so much so that there was nothing for them to eat. It was really a terrible, terrible set of circumstances. And here amid this chaos, we find Gideon in the winepress, threshing wheat to hide it from the Midianites. The exchange between Gideon and the angel of the Lord, the infamous response of Gideon in this dialogue, begs us to pause and examine why Gideon responded in the manner in which he did. Now, we don't know everything about Gideon, but let's look at the scriptures and what it does reveal to us about Gideon, so we can better understand his level of functioning. In practice, they call it biopsychosocial spiritual assessment. So in order for us to better understand a client, we have to look at the biology. We have to look at the spiritual aspect. We have to look historically at what has happened in their life. We have to look at biopsychos, the mind, and what's going on in the mind. And then we have to look at them socially. So we're going to look at Gideon as much as the scripture reveals about Gideon, but then we're going to look at us. We know that Gideon was the son of Joash from the Abiezrite clan in the tribe of Manasseh and lived in Ephraim. We know that his father worshiped Baal. We know that because later in the text, when he finally consents to obey Christ's call in the scriptures in verse 25, that the Lord told him to tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. So that's how we know that his father worshiped Baal. Therefore, the scripture tells Gideon after that, after he told him to tear down the Asherah pole, he told Gideon to tear it down. And Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the townspeople, he did it at night rather in the daytime. So we know that he comes from a pagan family. He grew up in a pagan household. We know from his response that he considered himself the least, and he considered his family poor and insignificant. We know that he believed God abandoned him and the people of Israel. And we know from his response that he felt abandoned. He felt forgotten. He felt rejected. It's probably even safe to say that he felt unloved by God, unwanted, maybe even betrayed by God, maybe even hated by God. We know from Judges 8:17 that Gideon had brothers who were killed because he said in dialogue with Zebah and Zalmunna that those were my brothers, the son of my mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared their lives, I would not kill you. But because you didn't, he ordered his young son to kill him. While we don't know quite how old Gideon is, we do from Judges 6:19 that he was old enough, if we look further down in that text, to go and prepare a young goat and unleavened bread, an ephah of flour, put meat in a basket, broth in a pot, and take food to the angel under the oak in Terebinth. We also know from the history of today's or tonight's text that the Israelites, his family, and Gideon was under oppression from the Midianites for 7 years. So I thought about that thing. So considering Gideon's abilities and his competence in the text, we can infer that he hasn't always been oppressed. That he has lived part of his life not being oppressed. He has lived part of his life good and being at peace. All of that before the oppression. We also know that his experience of oppression had so affected him that his response revealed feelings, and I said it, of abandonment, rejection, and betrayal. We know based on his response that he saw himself as little and small and weak and insignificant and inadequate and unimportant. You see, our experiences can affect what we believe about ourselves and how we see ourselves, how we see people, how we see our circumstances, how we see our future. It can affect how we perceive our world. For example, I'm just going to self-disclose, be transparent. I am. Anybody who's ever heard me preach, I do share my business because I feel like it's not my business. I take up my bed and walk. Everybody know that maybe once I was laid to that bed, but I have my bed to be a testimony of what God has done in my life. But just a couple of small examples. I remember, just to give you an example, because I want you to think about this. When I was a latchkey kid, and I hated being a latchkey kid. Everybody knows what a latchkey kid is. That's that little kid that's at home letting yourself in the house. Parents are working, so you have to come home and you have to feed yourself. And I lived off peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And in the summer, I ate peanut butter and jelly, 2 for breakfast, 2 gallons of milk a week. That's when I grew over the summer. Because that peanut butter, that protein, and all that milk, oh my gosh. I went back to school and they didn't recognize me. I had to recognize myself. So 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in the morning, 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for lunch. And since my mother got home after 6 and my father was never there, I had 2 more peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for dinner until she could get home and maybe cook me something. Even if it was an egg salad sandwich. It'll work. I looked in the refrigerator one time, I'm really sharing, and I didn't see any food. And I said, Mom, what are we going to eat? I'm hungry. And Mom looked in the refrigerator, and she didn't know what we were going to eat either, because all I saw was the back of that refrigerator. But what she did have is an egg. And what she could do is scrape the mayonnaise from the inside of that jar. And she put that mayonnaise on that egg, added a little bit of salt and pepper. We got the ends of that bread, honey. We toasted it. I ate it, and it was so kind of good. I said, Mom, where did you come up with that recipe from? That was a good egg salad sandwich. I haven't had an egg salad sandwich in a long time. I might have to make you one. I need my 50, y'all. So I was a latchkey kid, and like I was saying, is that I was very fearful. What I remember about the feelings and the emotion of being a latchkey kid was okay at first, but then I was being stalked by a young man who lived in the neighborhood. And I would get off the bus, and I would come home, and I remember the eerie feeling that I felt as I passed his house. And he looked out his window, and he stared at me as I went home every day. And then I remember the day that he came out his house, and he followed me around to my door. And he stood behind me, and he was waiting for me to open my door to go into my house. And I was terrified. But I knew if I opened that it was all over. So I couldn't go into the house. So I had God, God, God. All I can say is the Lord is good, because at that moment, I just act like my mother was home and was kicking the door and said, Mom, open the door. I have to use the bathroom. Hurry up, Mom, open the door. And I was banging on the door and banging on the door, and I was terrified. He couldn't see the terror on my face because I was so close to the door, and I was so terrified. But I screamed enough and got enough attention that he went away. But that experience changed me. Because from that experience, I was a scared little girl. I was scared to be at home. I was scared of the dark. I was scared. And I grew up with that fear all the way into my adulthood. I didn't realize, my parents didn't know. Here I am, 20-something years old, living in my mama's house and my daddy's house. I worked night shift, 11 o'clock to 7 in the morning. I would come home, get off work, and I would drive around all day long because I was scared to go home by myself. I waited just enough time for my father to come home. I knew he would come home. It's getting close to 3:30. I got there about 3:15. I got in the house and I carried my behind to bed because I was tired to get up and to do it again the next day. But let me tell you something about that experience that changed me. When I was pregnant with my children, I vowed to myself, my children